Okie doke. So Revelation chapter 2, and tonight we're going to do verses 18 rather and 19, which I shall read out to you. And unto the angel of the church in Thyatira write, These things saith the Son of God, who hath his eyes like unto a flame of fire, and his feet are like fine brass. I know thy works, and charity, and service, and faith, and thy patience, and thy works, and the last to be more than the first. So, a new church.
What chapter are we in? Sorry.
Revelation 2. Revelation 2, verse 18 and 19. So, a new church, Thyatira, which, if you're looking on a map, you might struggle to find, because it's now, I'm told, called Achisa, and is located about 155 miles southwest of Istanbul. So, it's in Asia Minor, like the other churches we've looked at. Why is that important? Do we need to know that it's so many miles southwest of Istanbul? Well, yeah, in a way I think it is important, because what we're seeing with the book of Revelation, although it's going to contain some of the most mysterious and prophetic and symbolic imagery that's in the whole Bible, that actually it's very much based in history and geography. You know, these are real places. If you remember right at the beginning, Revelation chapter 1, it starts off, well, it doesn't quite start off, but verse 9, the Apostle John says, I, John, who also am your brother and companion in tribulation. So he's talking to people who are going through tribulation at this time, and in the kingdom of patience of Jesus Christ, was in the isle that is called Patmos. So he gives his location, and then he gives the reason. He's in exile on the Isle of Patmos for the word of God and for the testimony of Jesus Christ. So we have all this information just in one verse, really, that it's not just kind of this spiritual kind of prophecy coming out, that we get the name of the person who's writing it down, we get his location, we get what's going on around him at the time. There's tribulation for the Christian church. And if you go further back, right to the beginning of Revelation 1 and verse 1, it says, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. So again, we get a time frame, don't we? At least when maybe not the whole time frame, but at least when these things are going to start. They're going to shortly come to pass. And so what we have is what we call historicity, real places, actual situations, and the churches that are named. Thyatira doesn't exist anymore. The church at Thyatira, the church in Ephesus that is spoken about here, doesn't exist anymore. So these are things that are happening at this particular time. Now, I do believe it goes on to talk about other things that will happen in many, many years to come. And also we get a glimpse into heaven and into eternity. But I think when it comes to understanding the book of Revelation, it's helpful for us to see that the Lord Jesus is presenting it in a historical context. It's not just like random prophecy or spiritual sayings. In that sense, it's not like the book of Proverbs, which is just like wise sayings, isn't it? Just one after another. But this is linked to a particular place, a particular time, and therefore I would suggest that the best way to interpret the book of Revelation, and this is how we will interpret it, or I will interpret it, is that it involves God's dealings in real time. God is outside of time. The way that theologians describe the Christian God, the one true God, is that he is spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. So he stands outside of time. He's not governed by time, but that he can come into time and interact with human beings in history. And that's really what the Bible's about, isn't it? With Abraham and Moses. It's like God coming into real time and interacting with real people. So that as a kind of general framework, I think is a good and helpful way to interpret the book of Revelation. It's God who is outside of time, and we'll see, a picture of that in heaven, but he's coming into time and he's dealing with things that are going to happen to his servants, to his church. And therefore that's a good basis for understanding this. So yes, in a way I think it is perhaps important to understand where Thyatira is located and that these are genuine people going through real experiences. So once again, Christ uses this technique that we might call commendation, criticism and correction. So first of all, he's saying, you do these things that are good and that he approves of, but then there's some things you're doing that he's not approving of, and then at the end he provides correction. In other words, he tells them what needs to be done. And I think that's good. It shows that Christ is fair, doesn't he? It's like, it would be awful if he never gave any encouragement, if it was just like, you rubbish at this and you can't do that, you're not doing this right. But then on the other hand, it would also not be helpful if he was just like, oh, you're great. Some churches where it's got to be positive, it's got to be, we saw on Sunday, the problems of a critical spirit, problem if you're just like always negative. But it's also a problem if you're just always positive. You never say, that's not realistic. So Jesus kind of covers both those things, doesn't he? He's just honest, basically. And again, the first person to be addressed is the angel or the minister, the leader of the church. Now it is thought that I've read that Thyatira was only a small church, and so next week we're going to see, God willing, the damage that just one person's sin can do to a church that is like this. There's a small church. But firstly, we have a description of Christ himself. I think these are really important, these little descriptions that Christ gives of himself. I think there's a lot of symbolism in them, because you can sort of tell, because the words are very unusual and almost poetic. But that's when you see that, often there's a lot of symbolism in there. So Christ's description of himself is, his eyes like unto a flame of fire, and his feet are like fine brass. So the image is of his omniscience, his all-knowingness. His eyes are like a flame of fire. It's like they can see through anything. It's like, just like when you strike a match and it dispels the darkness. You go into a dark room, strike a match, and you can see around you. It's like Christ's eyes are like that. They can see right through the darkness of men's hearts. They can perceive not just what we do, but why we do it. The thoughts and intents of the heart, the Bible says. This is what God can see, and this is what Christ can see, because Christ is God. And also his feet are like fine brass. Brass is often used in the Bible to denote strength. It talks about bolts of brass. It's like it's just that kind of figure that represents this incredible strength. Why brass and not iron, I'm not sure. But I know it is used to denote strength, and I think here maybe it's to do as well with the brass is kind of bright and reflects the light, doesn't it? So maybe it's connected in some way to light being synonymous with truth in the Bible. But it's this strength really is, I think, what it's talking about. He is his omnipotence, his all-powerfulness, his immense strength. So Christ is immovable. You cannot push him out of the way. Job 42 verse 2 says of Yahweh, I know that thou canst do everything, and that no thought can be withholden from thee. So it's like no thought can be hidden away from God, but he sees it all. He sees our hearts, he sees what not just what we do, but why we're doing it. What is the motive behind it? So it's very similar here to this kind of link with Job 42, which again really does make this an affirmation of Christ's deity, that Christ is God. Again, Jesus starts with, I know thy works. They all sort of start with that little phrase, don't they? Each church he goes to, I know thy works, I know thy works, I know thy work. What does that show?
He knows our works.
He knows our works, and if he's interested in them. If Jesus wasn't interested in the works that we do, if they weren't really important, why does he keep mentioning it? Why is every church he goes to says, oh, I know your works, and then he goes on to tell them what their works are or what their works ought to be, and they're not doing them. So it tells us straight away that if anyone tells you, well, it's not really about what you do, it's not really about works, it's just about faith in your heart. And why is Jesus asking all these churches, I know your works? Why is he showing interest in it? So not only does Jesus count works as valuable, but he also is interested in the motives that are behind these works. So one of the things that the church at Thyatira is commended in is not just their works, but the love that is the motivation behind them. Here, if you have a King James version of the Bible, it says, I know thy works and charity. That word charity there, we have a slightly different meaning, don't we, today? But charity means love. I know your love. So, kind of interesting when we compare this to the church at Ephesus. Do you remember that Ephesus, they took a stand against the Nicolaitans, they tested the false apostles, but they had left their first love and their first works. Because remember, Jesus says to them, remember, repent, do the first works. So here is Thyatira, is kind of contrast to that, isn't it? It's saying, well, you haven't left your first love, and you're producing these works that come out of that love. So there's a kind of that difference there between the church at Ephesus and this church here. They're not without problems, but at least they have that love. So they maintain their first love and their first works, and they're commended for those things. And in fact, in verse 19 it says that their works at the last were more than the first. In other words, their works were increasing. When they first set the church up, and they were doing good works, but now those works are actually increasing, and maybe not just increasing in frequency, but increasing in the amount of love that is behind them. And that's really encouraging, isn't it? Particularly for a small church, to know that this is what Jesus is looking for. This is what Jesus commands: is that our works are increasing. Sadly, what often happens is when people first become Christians, they're very zealous for God, and they do lots of good works and try and help people and share the gospel. But after a while, they tend to sort of slow down in that, and they don't do as many works as they did at first. Well, here it's the opposite, isn't it? They start off doing a few works, and then the works get more and more. So the works ought to increase, not decrease, as your love for Christ deepens. But even remaining just static, just saying, okay, well, what if I I'm just kind of maintaining this kind of works. I'm not decreasing in works, but I'm not increasing either. Isn't that okay? Isn't that just sort of, reasonable? Well, I'm going to take a look at a passage here. It's a longish passage, so I hope you'll bear with me. It's Matthew 25, but it illustrates an important point. Matthew 25, and it's a parable that Jesus tells. So it's Matthew 25, and it starts at verse 14. You have the Bible? It says, "For the kingdom of heaven is as a man travelling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several ability, and straightway took his journey. Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same, and made them other 5 talents. And likewise he that had received 2, he also gained another 2. But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth, and hid his lord's money. After a long time the lord of those servants cometh, and reckoneth with them. And so he that had received 5 talents came, and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. His lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. He also that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents beside them. His Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. Then he which had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee, that thou art a hard man. This is a picture of Jesus. Is Jesus a hard man? No. I knew that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast, that is thine. And his Lord answered and said, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received my own with usury. Usury is interest. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it to him that hath 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have an abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness, where there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So what Jesus is saying is kind of calling the man's bluff. So the others, the ones that have the 5 talents and the 2 talents, they take what the Lord has given them, and they gain more. They employ it. Whereas this man says, well, God's not given me the Lord's not given me very much. I'll just bury it in the earth and keep it here. And when he comes back, I can say, look, here's the thing that you gave me. I've not lost it or anything. It's still here. But then the man starts to say to the Lord, well, I know you're this hard man. And, it describes him as reaping where he hasn't sown. Well, what he's saying is you're an unreasonable man. It would be unreasonable, wouldn't it, to reap where nothing had been sown. And he's saying, well, he's trying to say that's the kind of man you are. So what happens is Jesus, playing the part of this Lord, is saying, well, if you thought I was that kind of man, you would have taken that talent and you would have worked really, really hard, because you would have been scared of me coming back. So he's saying, it's a lie, it's not true. You don't really think that, you're just a lazy servant. So you see the importance of works here that Jesus is saying is that your talents, which could include your intellect, your personality, your ability to empathise, but also the privileges you have, your knowledge, the freedom that you have in the society in which you live. What Christ expects of us living in the UK is not the same as he would expect of a Christian living in Saudi Arabia or somewhere, or in China, where they don't have the freedoms that we enjoy. We can access a Bible in our own language so easily. We can walk down the street wearing a cross or a Christian badge, declaring ourselves to be Christians. We can go up to someone in the middle of the street, hand them a leaflet and say, can I talk to you about Jesus? Well, the privileges we have mean Christ is expecting more of us, because there's some Christians who just don't have those privileges. And so therefore, if Christ comes to us and says, I know thy works, I know your works, have we buried our talent? Have we buried everything that God's given us in the earth, as it were, and just say, well, I didn't lose it, it's still here? Or are we actually employing it in the service of God, who actually saying, okay, and remember, this is a small church at Thyatira, so they don't have unlimited resources. They don't have, we don't have lots of resources. We can't sort of say, right, let's organise a campaign in Manchester for 3 months, and we'll do this and we'll get that, and we'll have a big stage. No, we can't do that. But it's He who is faithful in small things. God will give more. So we take what we have and we employ that for the Lord. This church was small, yet the works, love, service and faith and patience are growing. That's what it talks about, isn't it? The love, or rather the charity, the service, the faith and the patience in Revelation 2:19. So we must capitalise on the gifts that God has given us, whether they are large or small, but out of love to Him, not just out of a sense of duty, and not out of a kind of cringing fear. Oh my gosh, what if He comes back? I'll be in trouble. That's not a Christian's relationship with God. We love God, and it's more like a kind of parent and child figure, where you want to please your parent because you love them, and therefore, if your parent's asking you to do something, it's like, yeah, I'll do that. But out of love, it's a love relationship. So there's charity, there's service, there's faith, there's patience, but that faith should be producing fruit within us. Again, I'm going to finish with this. It's kind of a warning passage, but I feel it's right to kind of go to it. It's Luke 13. And again, it's a parable. Luke 13. And I think there's probably two applications to this. I think one is probably Israel itself, but I think there's a personal application we can make as well in light of what we've read. So Luke 13:6. He spake, he being Jesus, also this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came and sought fruit thereon, and found none. Then he said unto the dresser of his vineyard, Behold, these 3 years, interesting, isn't it? Jesus' earthly ministry was for 3 years as well. Behold, these 3 years I come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and find none. Cut it down. Why cumbereth it the ground? And he answering said unto him, Lord, let it alone this year also, till I shall dig about it and dung it, stick compost on it. And if it bear fruit, well, and if not, then after that thou shalt cut it down. So it's saying, if the tree doesn't bear fruit, God's going to cut it down. The tree isn't bearing fruit, but the dresser of the vineyard, who I believe is Jesus here, is saying, well, let me work on it. Let me encourage that growth of fruit, and then let's see how it does. And that's how Christ works. He is our advocate with the Father. He's saying, let me intercede. Let me do that ministry, and let's see if it bears fruit. And that's, I think, a great picture of not just of individual Christians, but also of the church in general. Let's see if Christ will bring fruit. But for our part, let's make sure that what we do is out of our love to God and our love for our neighbour. Let that charity be the motivator to our service and our patience and so on.